Next quarterback off the board after Jackson Dart, 25th yesterday, was Tyler Shuck. And then we saw Dylan Gabriel go at the bottom of the third round. So there's a lot to talk about and not a lot of time to do it before day 3 starts. So let's get to it. First things first, and producer Debo's with us well, so that's always fun. Shedeur Sanders, as we mentioned, still not a member of an NFL football team right now. 102 picks into the draft. You said earlier tonight on HQ, you've been in the front office for 17 years, and this is one of the wildest things you can remember. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and just because of the nature of the circumstance, right? There have been players that have had criminal things that have happened, some other things going on in their background that gives you reason for them not to be taken. But we're talking about a kid who has never done anything criminal, who's been a consummate teammate, despite what other people have put out there. This just feels like something different. And I can put my finger on it,
right?
But this just feels different. And I don't know how fair it really is.
Oh, it's not fair, but the response would be life ain't fair from people who maybe view it differently than you or I perhaps. And that's fine. Like, there's certainly more than one way to look at something. But you made this point earlier, you just made it again. We've seen players season after season in terms of signing contracts, year after year in the draft, who have major red flags for breaking the law and domestic violence and sexual assault, who get drafted. And it feels like, and our Jonathan Jones talked about this as well, like the NFL is sending a message. And Shedeur Sanders did the pre-draft process differently than anyone ever has who had an opportunity to be a first-round pick as a quarterback. Now, I'll ask you this. I know the answer for me personally, but do you think Shedeur could have handled it differently?
Yeah, I think he could have handled it different. You have to be honest and you have to be objective in the opinion. And yes, he could have handled it differently. However, again, we are judging a 22, 23-year-old with our 40, 50, and in most cases, some of these guys, 60-year-old brains.
Why are you pointing to me as a 60-year-old?
But to me, and that's the part that's not fair.
Yep.
And you said it on HQ. If they went back in everybody's history and judged what they were doing at 23, would most of us be in these positions? And so now we're hanging this over a young man's head because of the way he may have handled a situation that could have been done better. I'm sure he would say that. However, it's a 23-year-old. Let's just say he made a mistake. Now, how severe of a consequence is he going to have to pay for that mistake? Right. Which, might I add, again, was not a criminal mistake.
Yeah. And those things are all fair, and I think they're all worth talking about, and we can have these conversations without people getting mad at one another. I think that's part of the issue, the world we live in now, that everyone has to be on a side, and there's only one right answer and one wrong answer. There can be a middle ground.
Yeah, and let me say, I'm glad you said that because, and I'm going to look into the camera when I say this, if we don't agree on this topic, it does not mean I hate you or you hate me. We just disagree, and that's fine, and we move on because there will be plenty of other topics for us to talk about on this show.
But, I mean, this is arguably the biggest story in this draft class and probably in recent draft classes. And if you're listening, Debo just put up a tweet from Shedeur that says, "Thank you, God, for everything." That was at 10:45 p.m. At the end of day 2 of the draft. And that's all. I mean, he had a similar statement at the end of round 1 when he wasn't drafted. And I said this as well earlier tonight, and you have older kids and younger kids, Ran. I have an 18-year-old son, and 18-year-old sons do a lot of stupid stuff. And I say to him all the time, look, man, you have freedom of choice. You do not have freedom of consequence. So your actions are going to have consequences, good or bad. And we've heard time and time again that Shedeur didn't perhaps interview as well as he could have. Our Jonathan Jones talked about it as well during the combine and the pre-draft process. And I would imagine, I'll ask you this, if he had an opportunity to do it over again, do you think he would have taken a different approach?
Oh, absolutely. And you have to take a different approach because this one didn't work. This, not to the degree, but to what you just said, reminded me of my high school experience with my high school head coach, Jerry Hughes. Shout out to Coach Hughes on this. I was trying to do things my way at a certain point.
Yeah.
And it wasn't working. And so Coach Hughes and I, we kind of met in the middle because everyone who knows Coach Hughes, this is a stubborn dude. And so we came to a compromise, and he said, if you just try my way for a week, then I'll give you an opportunity. And I had to have that come to Jesus moment with myself as a then 16-year-old. And I had that moment. I said, let me try this guy's way. My way isn't working. So what happens, Ryan, after I went out and did it his way? I broke the school record for most yards in a game. And and from that moment on, I said, you know what? I'm going to do what this man is teaching me to do, because it clearly works.
And again, and you know this because you have older daughters and you have younger sons. Oh, you'll learn it if you don't.
Why you got to keep bringing up how many kids I got, man?
And
the age disparity. I feel like you're judging me, Ryan.
I'm still older than you, no matter how many kids you may or may not have. But the point I was going to make is that I have 2 sons, and I remember this from growing up. And to sort of piggyback on your story, boys develop later than girls, and that's been proven scientifically. And I see it in my son, I saw it in myself. And sometimes you're stubborn as a 16, 17, 18-year-old. You think you know how to do things. I've had that conversation with my son. My dad certainly had that conversation with me. You're not old enough to know exactly how things work in the real world. And if that were the case with Shedeur, it would not be a surprise, and it certainly doesn't make him a bad person. I just think that we're at a point, and we live in a world where everything's on social media, and as I mentioned before, everything has to be contentious. It doesn't have to be that way. Here, let me ask you this before we move on. How much will it affect Shedeur mentally? And I would ask you just to draw on maybe Brock Purdy went in the 7th round, for example. How did it affect him? Or guys that you've seen drafted previously that thought they should have been first-round picks who went rounds 3, 4, 5? What does Shedeur have to do, I should say, in terms to overcome this and not let it be something that is an albatross around his neck for the entirety of his NFL career?
And we kind of hit on it a little bit on HQ. It's one of those situations where clearly there's a team that's going to draft him, hopefully, prayerfully. But one of those teams drafts him, you can't call them and say, hey, we love you. We've waited to take you because you passed on him multiple other times. Just don't BS him and just say, hey, we're giving you an opportunity. And he has to see it as such. And he can't hold it against whatever team that drafts him that, hey, you didn't believe in me either.
Yeah.
He has to just say, hey, you giving me the opportunity, and now I'm going to go prove to everybody who I am and what I'm about.
Yeah. And that has been sort of the keeping receipts has been part of the allure and the success of Coach Prime coming to Colorado and the things they've had there. But you may have to change that going forward for the reasons you're talking about. And some of the teams that picked pretty early in the 3rd round, or the 4th round, excuse me, Jacksonville, I'm looking here. Vegas is at 108. The Jets are at 110. New Orleans drafted a quarterback at 112, and then at 123, I believe, the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you had to put on your GM hat, why would these teams have passed thus far? And do you think maybe the top of the 4th is where they might circle back? And because it's not an issue of how Shedeur plays on the field. Clearly, it feels like it's an issue about everything else.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna be optimistic here and just say that this 4th round is the sweet spot. Whether it's Vegas, whether it's Pittsburgh, one of those 2 teams, if you're facing them in the 4th round and you pass on them at this point, it sends an even worse message, right? Because if you're Pete Carroll, and we know the type of man that Pete Carroll is, and the amount of guys that Pete Carroll has given this opportunity to, who've had things in their background that may have rubbed people the right way. Like, Pete Carroll loves these type of projects, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And why not bring him to a place like Vegas where he can sit behind Geno Smith, who fell, who thought he was going to be a 1st-round pick and went to the draft and went to the 2nd. And Geno had needed to mature when he came out. And so who better to put Shedeur in a room with than Geno? And I'm sure that's someone that he would respect, with Pete Carroll being the ultimate leader of that organization. To me, now looking back at it, that might be a better fit than the actual Steelers.
And Geno Smith is a great one because I've come to love the way Geno Smith has played. But Geno's been in the league since 2013 when he was a 2nd-round pick out of West Virginia, thought he was going to be a 1st-round pick. And I recall correctly, he actually left Radio City after the first night. I don't blame him. I have no issue with players doing that because who wants to be sitting there while you're watching everyone else get drafted but you? But he had a rough start in New York. He had to sit on the bench for the Giants. He was at the Chargers, and then it took the right landing spot. And the Jets, yeah, that's where he started. Absolutely. So, Al Saunders I think he's a beat reporter, Debo. I think that's right, for the Pittsburgh, covers the Steelers. Art Rooney II said on Steelers radio, so yeah, the guy covers the Steelers, Alan Saunders does, that the Steelers draft a quarterback this year. He doesn't expect them to start. It's going to be somebody that will be developing and may play down the road. It's not like somebody that's going to have a big impact on this season. And I think that would have been Shedeur Sanders at pick 21 as well, though, right?
Yes, but to me, this screams this player is going to be someone that we're developing, may play down the road, and it's not going to have a big impact on the season. Why? Because
That's a fair question too.
Why? Because that you've already got something done with Aaron Rodgers. It just hadn't been announced yet.
Do you think another way to read that is that we're going to take a developmental quarterback like a Will Howard or Kyle McCord?
Potentially, which would again bring an even bigger question.
Right.
Because you've seen it. I read it all morning, about the nice things that Coach Tomlin have said about Shedeur throughout the process. Right. And, we felt like as outsiders/insiders, we felt like he was really in contention at 21.
Oh,
especially when
100%.
you start seeing a guy like Kenneth Grant not be available. And then there was a mini run on defensive tackles because you knew, or you felt like you knew, they were choosing between a defensive tackle or a quarterback. And so you started to see those tackles come off and you're like, oh, wow, this could really be the spot for him at 21. And then boom, they take Derek Harmon.
C-Rad leaves in the chat. It's good to see C-Rad there. Raiders may not work as well given what I think is improved leadership. And I think that's a two-way street as well, because you talked about Pete Carroll's ability to get through to players that maybe wouldn't have the opportunity at other places in terms of that improved leadership. Certainly wouldn't work under a Josh McDaniel regime previously. But there's also the relationship, we haven't talked about this in a while, which was sort of funny, is Tom Brady. Like, he and Tom Brady, he mentored Shedeur as well, and that seems to be no longer a talking point. Jesus, excuse me. I'm sure someone's called him Jesus before. I apologize. Jesus M says Rams get Shedeur. You worked for Sean McVay. You worked for Les Snead. You worked with Sean McVay before Les Snead. How would that dynamic work?
It could work because they've developed quarterbacks. However, their quarterback room is crowded.
Right.
It's already crowded. You have Matthew Stafford. You have Jimmy Garoppolo. You have Stetson Bennett, who I believe the Rams have an affinity for in Stetson Bennett, and they're trying to bring him along. So now you put Shedeur Sanders in that room, and it's a crowded room. So that's why I don't think, the Rams would be a good fit. To me, the top two teams that make the most sense is Vegas and Pittsburgh. And the problem the problem here with Pittsburgh, and I feel like, and myself included, we're beating Pittsburgh over the head because it's almost like we're forcing Shedeur to Pittsburgh without understanding how they feel.
Yeah.
Right? And you don't want to do that, or I don't want to do that. And that's why I'll take a step back from this point, because you don't want to put Pittsburgh in a situation where they're looking at the outside noise, which is us, and everyone talking about why they didn't do it and why they should do it, and put them in a position where it turns them off from wanting to take the kid at all.
Let me ask you about that, because that's an interesting point and one that I hadn't really thought about. But how much noise are you listening to on the inside when it comes to something that's not necessarily solely about football? There's some other outside pressures at play. Are you hearing from your PR people? Are you hearing from other folks around the league about, hey, man, what's going on here as this is or is not happening?
Well, it depends on who you are as a person.
Right.
Because I'm pretty sure in most organizations, whether it's high up or mid-level or wherever the case may be, there are people that are tuned in to social media, and they think that whatever their algorithm is showing them is the voice of the world at this point. Now, I get it, and I understand that there's a certain generation that does not understand the algorithm. And they don't understand that what you click on the most is what they continue to show you, which may be out of 100 people, maybe the loud 15.
Right. Now that's a good
as
point.
Opposed to the other 85 who are supporting you. But because you're constantly clicking on that and this is what you're searching for, it gives you that. Now, again, Coach Tomlin doesn't strike me as a guy that cares about the outside noise. I'm sure he hears it and he's aware of it, but he doesn't care. But we don't know how the other people within the organization feel and when they hear the outside noise.
Right.
Because if you're a Rooney and the Steelers are your life, and the Steelers will forever be synonymous with the Rooney family and the city of Pittsburgh. So to me, in my opinion, it would be hard for them to not hear the noise because they care so much about their organization and franchise.
Yeah. So, I mean, right. There are a lot of moving parts here. There are a lot of conversations to be had. And it's going to be interesting to watch how it plays out. And I think ultimately, if you're Shedeur or Coach Prime or anyone in the Sanders family close to the Sanders, you have to just embrace this as an opportunity to prove people wrong. You can be angry, but you can't let it consume you and turn it into sort of this vindictive tour, because that's not going to serve anyone. So we'll see. It certainly stinks for Shedeur, but hopefully there's a lesson in there. Like, I don't know if I ever told Debo this. I once got arrested with a fake ID in college. My dad just happened to be coming up to college the next day. I had to tell him that story. Didn't feel good, but I learned a lesson. He actually took it the right way. And, I told you my dad's in the military. He could have very easily just decided to, give me the military treatment. So
Bad kid.
You learn and you
Character
grow.
guy, Debo. We got a character guy.
Red flag for sure.
Put a black dot on Ryan's card.
That's right. A black dot. Yeah, for trying to buy a six-pack of Natural Light, if I recall correctly.
Natty Light? You went to jail for Natty Light?
I didn't go to jail. I got arrested. All right, that's enough. We're too far down the road. This ain't about me, Rand. All right.